Amen. Y'all can grab a seat. Well, hey, good morning, Citylight. Good to see you. My name is Austin, one of the pastors. Hey, here's a question for you. Complained about something that was meant to be a blessing. Have you ever complained about something that was meant to be a blessing? Well, like my whole life, without fail, at any normal, random, ordinary moment, my mom would yell out, "Picture! Let's take a picture." And you know what I mean. It's like a whole reality, right? And I remember grumbling as she would ask a stranger to take a picture of us at the Santa Barbara Pier. This is before selfies, so you like literally had to ask somebody. We would go to Disneyland, and every year when we're at the entrance, she would take a picture of us. And when we're standing in line, she'd take another picture. And when we're sitting down to pay for our overpriced meal, she would take the picture. Just ruthless about this idea of just capturing every single moment from our childhood. And every time I would hear her enthusiastic voice yell out, "Picture!" I would begrudgingly look at the camera, smile, she'd take it, and I'd go, "Mom, we don't need all these pictures. Like, it's okay. There's enough right now to fill up any album you have. Like, there is no way. We are okay." And yet she was resilient in her commitment to capture all these moments of our childhood, even though I was constantly complaining. And I thought it was a burden, to be honest. It was just like, man, this isn't fun. It's just so frequent. It's a burden. And then about 2 years ago, I found a little like kids safe that I had when I was a kid, like a little childhood safe type of thing. I eventually got it open, and in there I'm going through all these like little trinkets. It was hilarious to see what I thought was valuable back as a kid. But then I found it, this little Polaroid of me and my childhood best friend, Joey Dinner. And I mean, there we are, smiling from ear to ear, hats on backwards, skateboards, skinned up knees. And I can almost picture the scene of us hanging out and my mom interrupting our fun with, "Picture, let's take a picture." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, and we go. And yet, at the time, I thought it was a burden, right? And then 20 years later, after not seeing Joey after that picture was taken, I look back and I go, man, that's one of the most fundamental blessings I have. To look back and almost relive that moment because my mom was ruthless about her commitment to take pictures and capture memories. And so in our verses this morning, where Jesus is talking about the Sabbath. And so as you hear the word Sabbath, I want you just to think, what comes to mind? Like, what do you associate that word with? Like, what's filling your mind right now as you think of the topic of Sabbath? Now, because I'm a sinful person and y'all are sinful and I've been walking with you for a few years now, I'm willing to bet that just like the Pharisees in our story, when we hear Sabbath, for the most part, it's accompanied by a slew of burdens. An impossible, outdated command from God, a frustrating, confusing nuisance that some of us may feel obligated to do. But my dream this morning is that we collectively, through the Word and His Holy Spirit, would have a Joey Dinner Polaroid moment. Right? That we would see this thing that we've seen as a blessing and a burden and an obscure old tradition. And then God would transform that to go, oh my gosh, this is one of the greatest blessings that God has ever given us. It's mind-blowing that we would have the privilege to be invited into Sabbath rest. So I'm extremely excited for this morning, and that's my hope as we go in, that we would have this Joey Dinner Polaroid moment, that God would shape our hearts. And maybe you're like, actually, I have a good idea of the Sabbath, but I'm arguing that however great your idea of, it's even more beautiful. It's even more rich. It's even more packed with blessings. So we're going to be in verses 1 through 6, like John, or 1 through 11, like John just read, but I'm actually going to, it's a little bit weird. I'm going to start in verse 5. It's the key verse that ties the whole passage together. So we're going to read verse 5. I'm going to explain it, and then we're going to look at the two stories collectively. Okay? Luke 6, verse 5. And Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of Sabbath." The Son of Man is Lord of Sabbath. Now, Jesus was most commonly referred to as Christ. Like, that was his most common title that people used for him. The next one was Lord, which just means God. Christ means Savior or Messiah. But the most common language that he used for himself, the title that Jesus imposed on himself the most, was Son of Man, was that phrase, Son of Man. So that's what Jesus called himself. And that was rooted back in Daniel 7, which is a messianic, like, prophecy fulfillment of what God would do through the Son of Man. So when Jesus says Son of Man, make no mistake, he's calling himself God. So right here he says the Son of Man is Lord of Sabbath. Now what does that mean? It means Jesus is saying, I invented the Sabbath. Number one, Son of Man, I'm God, and I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. I'm the Lord over it. I was the one who instituted it in Genesis chapter 2 when I created the world. I was the voice who spoke to Moses the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai in Exodus 20. It was my idea. Now, why does that matter for us to understand that? Because Jesus is saying, you've taken what I've made and you've polluted it with your own ideas. You've made the Sabbath into something that it isn't. I get to tell you what the Sabbath means. And by the way, this is objectively true, is it not? Like the one who created something automatically has the authority to define what it is. The word authority, like what the root word of that is author, right? If you're the author, if you're the creator, you automatically get the authority to define what you have authored, what you have created. Elon Musk gets to define what Tesla is. Jeff Bezos gets to define what Amazon is. Mark Zuckerberg gets to define what Facebook is. And Bill Gates gets to define what Microsoft is. And it doesn't just work with founders of massive tech companies. My daughter, Gracie, she gets to define her artwork to me, right? She gets to tell me what she made and what she intended, even if her dragon looks exactly like a strip of bacon. Like, she gets to say, that's a dragon, and I don't get to say anything about that. And can we just pause for a moment and acknowledge how infuriating it is when someone tries to redefine what you made? Like 10 years ago, I was on a mission trip in San Diego, wrote a song, was happy. I shared it with a friend, and my friend goes, oh, his immediate response, I got a great idea. Here's what I would do. I would change up the melody like just a little bit, and the bridge is great, but I think you'd have a different chord progression, and I think it should be more reflective and less like happy. And I literally just went I almost just like slammed him with the guitar. You know, it's like, dude, don't go there. Like, and I'm all for collaboration, and I'm all for collective creativity, but there's something infuriating and offensive about someone trying to grab your idea and change it and redefine what they didn't create. It's a problem for 3 reasons. Number one, just quick, they're overstepping their authority. You don't have the authority to tell me what I created. Number 2, they're communicating there's something wrong with what you made. And number 3, the worst, they're missing the joy and the purpose of what you created, right? And so all those go in together. And this is what's happening in these surrounding verses. These Pharisees are imposing their ideas onto what the Sabbath is, but they didn't create it. Therefore, they don't get to define it. And we didn't create the Sabbath, so you and I don't get to define what it is. See, the main point of all these 11 verses is Jesus telling us that he gets to say what the Sabbath is. That's what Jesus is trying to draw on through these verses very easily, the main point. And so what he does is he deconstructs what they thought the Sabbath was and what we think the Sabbath is, all these religious, burdensome notions, and he subtly reconstructs his beautiful original plan for the Sabbath. And in essence, that's the main point, but the message Jesus is getting across is this, is the Sabbath is packed with blessing, not polluted with burden. He wants you to know that he gets to define what the Sabbath is. And in his definition of the Sabbath, it's this, that it's packed with blessing, not polluted with burden. And now that we know this, we're going to look at these 2 stories of Jesus on the Sabbath, right? And we're going to look intentionally to deconstruct what they thought it was, what we think it is, and then reconstruct into what Jesus actually says it is. And as we'll find out, there are 2 fundamental components to the Sabbath. This isn't just like a random idea from a blog. If you look all the way back to Genesis 1:31, God says, it is good. And this is a celebration aspect. And then in chapter 2, verse 2 of Genesis 2, very first book of the Bible, very first chapters, it says that God rested on the 7th day. There's a ceasing to Sabbath and there's a celebrating to Sabbath. Those are the 2 main components that we're going to see, that it's an invitation to cease and an invitation to celebrate. That's what makes up the Sabbath, both of which we're terrible at doing. And because we tend to be so bad at Sabbathing and ceasing and celebrating, I know that we've drawn the natural conclusion that it's a burden. It's not a blessing. We don't have enough time for this. How does God expect me to stop working? I've got kids. I've got an exam Monday. I've got deadlines at work. I've got a house that needs clean. But again, my prayer is that we would see this as a blessing, a Joey dinner Polaroid type of moment. So Jesus is the Lord of Sabbath, And we're going to look in and see these two aspects of ceasing and celebrating. So first, the Sabbath is an invitation to cease. Look at verses 1 and 2 with me. Chapter 6, Sabbath is an invitation to cease. Now, on a Sabbath, while he was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what isn't lawful to do on the Sabbath?" Okay, so this is just context, right? Jesus and his disciples are out in the field, and they're plucking some grain, or they're eating some grain off the fields. Now, this isn't a main point, but I just want to point this out because Jesus is amazing. Jesus is God, pre-existent, and before he decides by his own volition to come down to earth to rescue us, he's in heaven, fully satisfied, fully just comfortable in all of that. And I'm confident that in heaven, Chick-fil-A isn't closed on Sunday, and you don't have to pay extra for guac at Chipotle. Okay, I'm just saying that. I'm pretty sure that's true. And Jesus is there. Whatever he wants, all the comfort imaginable in heaven, and yet he willingly chooses for us to come down to earth, live a perfect life, die a perfect death that would be a substitute for us so that we could be united with God forevermore, right? It's beautiful based on us trusting in him. And yet in this moment, that amazing, sovereign, comfortable God in heaven has left heaven to come on earth, and what's he doing? He's in a field scrounging for food. Like, you just thought about the beauty of Jesus right there, like the level of his sacrifice to go like unlimited Chick-fil-A, even on Sunday, free guac, and now to come down and be picking off little heads of grain for them to eat. Like, that's a crazy, beautiful thing about Jesus. And so this happens, and they're out there, and the Pharisees don't like it. They ask the question, why are you doing what you're doing? Why? It's not lawful. But we have to ask the question, well, what do they mean by that? What isn't lawful about them eating some snacks out in the field on the Sabbath? Well, in Exodus 20, verse 9, it says this: 6 days you shall labor, and this is part of the Ten Commandments, and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord. On it you shall not do any work. Okay, so that's part of the Ten Commandments. Keep the Sabbath holy. This is his explanation of it in Exodus 20. So they know, and we know, that it's a command to keep the Sabbath holy. Don't do any work. But then this trouble is that you have to define, okay, well, what is work, right? Now, the Jews had this really handy little guidebook called the Mishnah. And the Mishnah laid out all the practicalities of the Bible. It gave clear definitions. It filled in any gray area the Bible had. It was a collection of specifications on how to follow the law. But to be clear, the Mishnah is not the Bible. It was meant to supplement the Bible or help the Bible. And to define work, what they came up with in the Mishnah is 39 clarifications of what work is. 39 categories of work, 3 of which were reaping, winnowing, and threshing. Okay, I don't know what winnowing and threshing means, but I do know what reaping means, okay? Anyways, when Jesus' disciples picked the heads of grain, that would be classified to them as reaping because they took it off, right? Like, you can't take an apple off a tree, right? So that would be reaping. And then for them to rub them in their hands, check this out, that would be considered threshing and winnowing. Again, don't know what it means, but I just know that that's the correlation, okay? This made the Pharisees furious. I mean, according to the Mishnah, they caught them red-handing breaking 3 laws on the Sabbath. Keep in mind that these aren't the Bible, these clarifications, just the Jewish leaders' best interpretation of how to apply the Bible. But the Pharisees called Jesus out and his disciples, what are you doing? Why are you breaking the law on the Sabbath? Now, I want to pause real quick, and I want to point out why the Sabbath is so fundamental and why it's such a main point of attention through the whole Bible, but specifically here. There's 3 reasons why the Sabbath is a main point of attention. Number 1, it is rooted in the creation account and the 10 Commandments. So this is like the 2 biggest events. Like, if you're pretty much brand new to Christianity, or even not at all. Like, I remember before I knew Jesus, I had heard about God creating the world, and I had heard this idea about it before I even trusted it. And I had heard about the 10 Commandments, whether or not you're Christian or not. It's just like those are fundamental, humongous events. And in both of those, guess what's central to them? The Sabbath in creation and the Sabbath and the Ten Commandments, right? In Genesis 2, God gets done creating all the world. He says it's good, and then he follows it up, and he says, and on the seventh day, he rested from his works and set it apart as holy. The Ten Commandments in Exodus 20, there's all these commands. Think of all the things that God could command. He piles it down to 10 loving fatherly commands, and one of them is to choose to say, keep the Sabbath holy. It's crazy. So it's a major point of attention because the two most fundamental events, arguably, it is a focus point. Number two, it's a main point of attention because it's frequency. It's every single week, one day every week. On the seventh day, you would Sabbath. So a seventh of your life is spent doing this. So it dictates your plans, your schedule, your meal prep, like all those things it dictates. And number four is a major point of attention because it's easily observable. Like you know whether or not someone's observing the Sabbath or not, right? Like you see Larry and he's got his shovel and he's walking outside to dig a trench. You know, it's like, bro, you're breaking the Sabbath. You know what I mean? It's like it was so observable where you couldn't just like hang out inside and watch HTV and then put some shiplap up with no one seeing you. Like there, you know what I mean? Like there was some level of like observance collectively. It was really clear. And it became this like, unfortunately, this religious dichotomy, whereas like the people who Sabbath really well and the people who don't. It became this way to split people. So those are three reasons. That's the story of them in the field. Now, let's look at the story of Jesus in the synagogue. Look at verses 6 and 7. So Luke down to 6 and 7. On another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath, so they might find a reason to accuse him. All right, so on a totally different Sabbath, Jesus is in the synagogue, and guess who's back? Guess who's back? Back again, right? The policy police, the Sabbath sheriffs, the Mishnah missionaries, they're out, they are ready. There's a dude there with a withered hand in the synagogue while Jesus is teaching. And what are the Pharisees doing? They're not worshiping, they're not celebrating, they're not Sabbathing, they're watching for Jesus to mess up. See, the Mishnah actually allowed for you to violate the Sabbath if it was to save someone's life. You could violate the Sabbath if it was life or death, but is a withered hand life or death? No. Like, it could wait. Like, it could wait a week or two. It could wait till Sabbath is over. He could schedule a meeting with Jesus at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. Like, there's a bunch of different opportunities. And but it would be violating for Jesus to do something with his hand because it's not life or death. And Jesus knows that. And the Pharisees know that. For Jesus to heal his hand would be a violation of the Mishnah because it wasn't life or death. And we'll look at Jesus' response to both of these stories later. But I want to pause and I want you to notice how although these Pharisees are trying to enforce the Sabbath, they themselves are breaking the Sabbath. Right? They're still working. Luke wants to make it clear that when they're out in the fields, they're not Sabbathing. They're not taking in God's beautiful creation. They have their badges out and their cuffs ready to make a citizen's arrest. Luke makes it clear that when they're in the synagogue, they're not worshiping God. They're not learning from his word. They are watching, investigating to see Jesus make a mistake so they can do something about it. They're trying to get other people to Sabbath, which is making them break the Sabbath. See, my daughter Gracie, love her to death. She loves pointing out when people aren't closing their eyes in prayer, okay? And so she goes, Daddy, Haddon's not closing his eyes. And I'm like, sweetheart, for you to notice he's not closing his eyes means that your eyes aren't closed. You know, it's like, it doesn't, like you can't do that. Like pointing someone out that they're not, it's like you're breaking it, you know? It's hilarious. It happens like every night. And so anyways, we need to work on that. So pray for that little girl. But anyways, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. In our culture today, though, and this is what I really struggle with the text. Like, it doesn't exactly translate, does it? Like, in some sense, it's like we, in our culture, in our church, we aren't struggling, I assume, by being the Sabbath sheriffs, right? Like, we don't, like, Jesus wouldn't walk in today and call us out and go, you guys are being way too hard on the Sabbath. You guys are enforcing it, and by you enforcing it, you're breaking it. Like, he wouldn't say that, but at the core of the Pharisees' problem was an inability to cease. At the core of their problem was an unwillingness to stop, a rejection of the invitation to rest. They kept working. And although they worked on something very different than we do, the struggle is the same, isn't it? Like, we are terrible, terrible at resting. Like, I'm convinced that we don't have the cognitive ability in our brains to understand what it means to stop. Like, that word doesn't mean in our heads what it should mean. Like, we don't stop at stop signs. We don't stop, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just like all these areas, like, we just don't know what it means to stop. Stop producing, stop striving, stop studying, stop scrolling, stop moving, stop doing, just stop. Like, we can't just sit in line. We can't even, I mean, you're on a date or you're at coffee and the person you're with leaves, and what's the first thing you do? You grab your phone. Like, we just aren't good at just doing nothing. We don't even know how. Like, it's crazy. And I know there's generational differences in this room, but it's just like, I think it's plaguing to younger people, but I think all generations face the same reality. We just don't know how to stop. And I'm convinced that there's three main reasons that we don't honor the Sabbath. There's three main reasons that we don't honor the Sabbath by ceasing. Here they are. Number one, we think the Sabbath is obsolete. We think the Sabbath is obsolete. I don't need rest. I've got coffee. I've got streaming services. I don't need to take this Sabbath rest. There are other ways to get that done. Oh, and by the way, I haven't taken a Sabbath in years or ever, and yet I'm doing just fine. And my life isn't falling apart, therefore I don't need the Sabbath. Or, hey, I've been a Christian for so-and-so years, and I've never taken a Sabbath, and me and Jesus are super close. And I'm doing great reading my word, and I'm doing great praying, and I'm not Sabbathing, and I'm doing just fine with Jesus. There isn't a problem. Don't try to fix it. And I've been reading all this stuff about Elon Musk's long hours and Bill Gates' work ethic, and we see that and we go, man, and they're not resting, and they're changing the world, and they're doing all these great things, and they didn't rest, so we don't need rest either. It's obsolete. At the core of it's the belief that the Sabbath wouldn't benefit us. At the core, it's just this idea that I think 99.9% of us believe the Sabbath really genuinely wouldn't benefit me. And my response to that is that I had a friend in college who would brag about how long he would space out his oil changes. And so, I'm in there. My dad's a car salesman, so I'm in there like he kind of keeps up on me on that. I'm like, yeah, every 3 months or every 3,000 miles, like I'm changing my oil. And it's $30 every time. My buddy's like, yeah. He's like, it's been 2 years. And I'm like, wow. I'm actually jealous. I'm doing the math. I'm like, that's a lot of Chipotle burritos. That's a lot of Chick-fil-A. You know what I mean? It's like you start to do that, and it's like, man, that you're saving a lot of money. And it's like his car drove great, started up great, got him where he needed, and it made me consider, like, should I do this every 3 months or 3,000 miles? Like, it seems redundant. It probably doesn't seem super necessary. Then one day, my buddy's car broke down, and it was irreparable. Like, he needed a whole new engine because of what he had done to it by not giving the oil change. So hear me say this. Just because you've been getting by without Sabbath doesn't mean you don't need it. And by the way, that's a terrible metric to ever assess your life with, like, I'm doing fine without it. We don't use that with anything else. We constantly want to improve. We constantly want to be better. And it just because you've been getting by without it doesn't mean it won't catch up to you soon. And so I'm pleading with you to Sabbath. I'm pleading with you to see the beauty and the blessing of this, because if you wait long enough, the damage could be irreparable. So just so you know, objectively, you need the Sabbath. You're not superhuman. You're not somehow stronger than the rest. Like, all of us need the Sabbath. Number two, the second reason is we think the Sabbath is outdated. We think the Sabbath is outdated. Second reason why we don't honor the Sabbath. We kind of have this thought that, like, it doesn't work in our culture today. God must have understood, not understood how busy we would be today. My phone never stops ringing. My emails never stop coming in. My social media never stops needing my attention. I mean, it's different, Jesus, thousands of years later. Sabbath may have worked for them then, but not us now. Also, it doesn't seem like very many people are Sabbathing today, besides some weird old-fashioned religious people. Like, it just doesn't fit in our world today. I mean, do you really expect me to turn off my phone, not check my investments, not post on my social media? Because that's what Sabbath is about, is Sabbathing, taking a picture of your Bible Sabbathing, and then posting on social media so everyone knows. That's what we think Sabbath is about. I'm Sabbathing. Click. I'm doing great. Waiting for likes to come in. It's like, wow, great Sabbath. Anyways, I came out swinging right there, okay? But I'm swinging at myself, okay? Because I'm guilty too. Listen, uh, it's so crucial. Are you seriously asking me to not get any work done? This is the belief that the Sabbath doesn't apply to us. It's a belief that the Sabbath just doesn't apply to us thousands of years later. My response to that is for you to know that the Sabbath was created before we were. Okay? This is fundamental. The Sabbath was created in Genesis 2, verse 2, and that's several verses before God breathes into making Adam and then later making Eve. Okay? So before Adam and Eve come on the scene, guess what God does? He makes the Sabbath. He institutes and creates the Sabbath. God didn't go, oh man, you know what? Adam and Eve are really busy. They need to rest. What do you think? The Trinity is operating. And it's going, well, let's 10 days, 5 days. Let's do 7. Let's just land in the middle. Let's do 7. Every 7 days they rest. That sounds good. And then that'll give them a break and it'll be really good because they tend to be so. No, it was God's proactive blessing to say, I want my people to rest. Before we ever overworked, God instituted rest. You need to understand that. It was his proactive creation for all generations and all of his children to enjoy this blessing. And although I do believe that we're the busiest, most distractive people to have ever lived in existence, it was not easier for people in 30 AD to Sabbath. Like, don't believe that lie. Think about it. Like, we have savings accounts, and they had their daily bread and their daily journey to go get it, or fish, whatever. Like, we have Uber Eats and DoorDash. Like, they would have to literally prepare all their meals the day before. Like, every generation has their struggles with Sabbath, right? It wasn't easier then as it is now. The Sabbath is not obsolete. It does absolutely apply to us. And number 3, the third reason I think we don't honor the Sabbath is because we think the Sabbath is offensive. We think the Sabbath is offensive. Not only do we think it's obsolete and outdated, but we think the Sabbath is offensive. Now, I mentioned Bill Gates and Elon Musk earlier, and they have crazy work hours, like if you study it. And as I looked through all these comments, people were praising them for it. And one of the things I've come to realize in our modern culture today is that overworking is the new cultural stamp of approval. Like, it is. It's like busyness is the new, like, you are a good person then, or you are validated in your existence. Like, there's some level, like, if you're not working 60, 70, 80 hours, like, what are you doing, right? And, like, that's what we celebrate, and that's what we praise. And by the way, like, let's just be real. We justify our existence based off what we can produce. Like, it just happens all the time. And so to tell us to stop is offensive because it means we have to compromise the very thing we identify ourselves with. If I stop working, who am I? If I stop producing, what's the point of my existence? My wife and I watch a show called The Good Doctor. It's amazing. If anyone watches it, we'd love to watch it with you. I think it's like Tuesday nights or something like that. But anyways, it's this show, this story about a doctor, a surgeon, and he happens to have autism, and it's kind of his unique, amazing surgeon. And along the way, but he's super blunt, which is like my favorite thing. He's like just super straightforward. And he meets in this episode, just this last week, he meets this doctor, and the doctor is older. He's probably in his 60s, and he's like a world-renowned surgeon. And he comes in. I think he has a hand tremor, something with his hand that he has to get fixed because he can't do surgery with it. And so what happens is he goes, I want this surgery. Now, it's terribly dangerous. It's terribly risky. It's like a 50% flip of the coin that he'll die during it. And he goes, I want to take this. I want to get the surgery. And Sean, the doctor, goes, are you serious? You're wealthy, you're world-renowned, and you're retirement age. Like, why not stop? Like, don't risk your life for this at the end of your life. Like, just enjoy. And he keeps asking, and finally the guy has this emotional breakdown, and he goes, I save people's lives. That's the only reason people tolerate me. The only reason people care about me is because I'm a doctor. And if you take that away, people won't care about me. And I watched it, and I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm so heartbroken by that. And I'm sure that all of us in the room right now could finish the statement, people care about me because, and we would put in some type of activity that we do. I mean, I struggle believing that. People like me because I'm enthusiastic or because I preach or I lead or whatever, but it's like, and do you see how blended, unfortunately, our identity and our activity are? It's like you can't separate the two. Like, I am what I do, and that's not true biblically, but that's what we think and that's how we operate. And it's like people care because I do this, and so if I stop doing this, people won't care. And then what does it lead to? Busyness. Our packed schedules. It leads to exhaustion and anxiety and all of that because we can't stop doing, because if we do, people will stop caring. It's offensive then for Jesus to challenge that. It's offensive because the competition out there isn't stopping. And if I stop and I Sabbath, well, they're going to have an edge on me. In sports, in school, in jobs, in finances, a day off for me means that they're a day ahead of me. This is the belief that the Sabbath takes from us, that the idea of Sabbath would rob from us. And my response to that is to ask you a question. Is there a better way to communicate your trust in God than by taking a Sabbath? Like, 1,000%, there's a bunch of ways to communicate trust in God. Building in a community, taking steps of faith, going to the nations, giving. But it just seems like there's some aspect of the Sabbath on a weekly basis to say, God, even when I stop working, I believe you're going to provide. Even when I stop doing, I'm going to trust you're my identity, not my production. You know what I mean? Like a weekly 24-hour pronouncement to God of, I trust you. And I believe that you'll provide even when I stop laboring. Now, I want to point this out. In light of us thinking this, all those things, that it's obsolete, that it's outdated, and that it's offensive, of course we feel like the Sabbath is a burden, right? Like you can just put those pieces together, add it up, and it's like, of course it's a burden. Of course we're reluctant today that the Sabbath is a point of conversation. Let's talk about love. Let's talk about justification, you know? It's like, of course we don't want to feel under the obligation of taking a Sabbath regularly. But think about this. God gives 10 commandments, okay? These are 10 laws, rules, heavenly provisions that God says, this is for my children. This is what I want for you. It's the good fatherly commands that he gives. And of the 10, think of all the ones that he could do. And there's some that make sense to us, right? Like don't kill, don't murder, don't covet, don't steal, like all those things. But one of them, of the 10, is Sabbath. Okay, so then process this with me. What's the point of every other religion? Like you study the gist and the summary of every other religion, and basically here it is. God getting as much as he can out of you. Like give, serve, pray, sacrifice, learn, do. Every other religion is a transactional, shallow relationship of us clawing our way up to God. Maybe, just maybe, with enough work, you can get there. But there is no time for a day off in other religion. Like you need to work, you need to put it in. And yet actually stop to think about the Sabbath. This is God's giant declaration that he doesn't need what you can offer. He doesn't want what you can produce. This isn't a transactional relationship. This is a father to his children. Stop working. I want you. This is God's sledgehammer swinging at our concept of who he is and who we are. He's saying, I want you, your heart, your affection, your devotion. I want an intimate relationship with you. You're not doing chores. You're not my employee. You're not some object for me getting something done. You're my daughter. You're my son. That's what the Sabbath is screaming to us. And it's like we're so busy we can't hear it. We can't receive it. Like we're just so against it. And yet God is lovingly saying, I'm instituting the Sabbath to remind you that I love you without any conditions, without any strings attached. You're my son, you're my daughter if you've trusted me. And listen, there's no way that can be a burden. There's no way. That's a blessing 100%. That's a gift. The Sabbath, number one, is an invitation to cease. And then quickly to understand, second, the Sabbath is an invitation to celebrate. Look at verses 3 and 4. This is what happens in response to the Pharisees in the field. 3 and 4. And Jesus answered them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry? he and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those with him. And Jesus goes, the Son of Man is the Lord of Sabbath. Now, the second thing to see is the Sabbath is an invitation to celebrate. This is much shorter because we've done all the back work. But what you need to understand is their inability to cease prohibited them from celebrating, right? The two work in tandem. And so Jesus mentions this story in Luke 6. It's from 1 Samuel 21. Now, David is running from Saul. David gets anointed as king. Saul doesn't like it. David gets all this praise. Saul's not for it. So David's running for his life, okay, with all of his men, and Saul's chasing him down, and they're hungry, they're starving, and they run into a priest named Ahimelech. Now, David asks, hey, Ahimelech, me and my boys are super, super hungry. Do you have anything to eat? Ahimelech goes, we don't have anything to eat. David's face sinks in disappointment. Ahimelech goes, well, actually, we do have bread, but it's the holy bread. It's the consecrated bread. And according to ceremony, like the only person who can eat this bread is actually a priest. And David goes, well, me and my men have been holy. We've kept ourselves, like we're good. And Ahimelech goes, you know what? Y'all are hungry. There's no way that God's ceremony would inhibit someone from eating that's hungry. And he goes, here, you guys have the bread. And so David eats the bread, this ceremony bread, and so does his men. And so Jesus brings up this story, and there's no punishment from God. There's no acknowledgement that wasn't right. No slap on the wrist. Like, that was a good story. And Jesus brings this up to them. David, the Old Testament hero, and he's kind of challenging me, going, hold on. So David and his buddies ate this holy bread, and we ate some grain in a field. And if the holy bread's okay to eat, don't you, when you're hungry, that was the only scenario, don't you think that the grain would be okay to eat? You know what I mean? It's like this, you're like, he's paralleling these two, and like, this doesn't make sense, right? Okay, now look at verses 8 through 11. Look at the rest of the story with the withered hand, 8 through 11. But Jesus knew their thoughts, and he said to the man with the withered hand, come and stand here. And he rose and stood there. And Jesus said to them, I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to destroy it? And after looking around at them all, he said to them, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. So Jesus knows their thoughts, knows what they're thinking. He takes the bait, and he grabs the dude with the withered hand, brings him up in front of everyone, and goes, hey, question for you, since you guys are masters in the law, is it like lawful to do good or to do bad, to save life or destroy life? I'll let you answer, you know? And they're all like I don't know. And then he finally goes, hey, stretch out your hand, and he heals the dude. I mean, it's amazing. Can you imagine being here on a Sunday morning and someone in our church has an illness or some type of paralyzed or whatever, and we come in, we pray, and then boom, they get healed? Like, it would be a crazy celebration, right? Like, that's amazing. But look how the Pharisees respond. Verse 11, it says they were furious. In Matthew 12, the parallel account, it says they started to plan on how to destroy Jesus. They're so mad at him for doing this on the Sabbath. What's all this mean? That the Sabbath is an invitation to cease and to celebrate. Luke is making it clear that the Pharisees in the field were so busy as policy police that they couldn't celebrate that hungry people got fed. Their religion got in the way of celebration, right? Their concept of ceremony and law and rule keeping. Luke makes it clear that the Pharisees in the synagogue are so busy as the Sabbath sheriffs that they can't celebrate that a man just got healed. Like, it's wild. And it's the same thing for us. If we don't cease, we'll never be able to celebrate. And if we don't stop and take a look back and look at what's right in front of us, we will perpetually forget to celebrate what Jesus has done for us and through us. And so, because we're so bad at ceasing, by the way, we rob ourselves from the joy of celebration. And here's what I mean. I've observed this in my life and in so many of your lives. Right when we finish something, we immediately move on to the next thing. Don't we? It's like we never get to enjoy what we just finished, or it's like we win a game and it's on to the next game. We get a promotion, it's on to the next. You ace a test, it's on to the next. You nail a presentation, it's on to the next. Honestly, let me just ask you, when is the last time that you just stopped? You looked around at what happened and you just said thanks. Like, when's the last time with a deep breath and a reflective heart that you actually processed all that God has done for you and all that he's done through you? Now, again, quick, I'm not celebrating. I want to let you know there's some realities to that and some responses to that. And not celebrating leads to three things. So quickly, number one, not celebrating and not taking this value of Sabbath to celebrate, it leads to discontentment. It leads to discontentment. By not stopping to celebrate what's happened, you feed the disease of discontentment. By not enjoying what you have or what's happened, you throw that gift to the side and you hurry on to the next achievement. It's like Christmas morning, and I see my kids do this all the time. If you have kids, or I'm sure we were all guilty of it, my kids are so consumed with all the gifts that they open the gift and it's awesome and they're like, that's awesome. And I almost want to give my daughter, I just want to give her one gift at a time and just there's no other gifts. And she's like, awesome. And she just plays with it. It's 10 minutes later. Okay, here's another one. Really? That's cool. But it's we just toss these gifts to the side as if they mean nothing. And then we focus on the next one or the best one. It's but there's so much here to work with and to celebrate, but we're so busy moving that we can't actually play and enjoy what God gave us. Sabbath gives us the much needed medicine of contentment. Number two, not celebrating leads to depression. I'm not talking about clinical depression. There's unique caveats to that. I'm just talking about a spiritual, emotional depression that we can all in some way feel. By not stopping to celebrate what's happened, you will psychologically convince yourself that there wasn't anything worthy of celebration. You track with me on that? If you don't pause to celebrate, you are convinced that there wasn't anything worthy to celebrate. And we are so immensely talented at critiquing and pointing out what's bad or what could be better. And so if you don't celebrate, of course, all you can think about is how your life could be better and how other people's lives are better, right? And my buddy that I was discipling years ago, he was just struggling deeply with this kind of depression, weight, sadness. And he was just my life is terrible. My life sucks. He's it's just really, really hard. And we're processing through that. And I'm okay, why? And he's telling me all these things. And he had a hard, tough life. And we're going through. And I said, man, and he didn't mention any good that Jesus had done for him. I said, here's my challenge for you. And I asked him, kind of do you think there's more good than bad in your life? And he was objective, there is more bad than good in my life. I said, okay, I track with that. What I want you to do, and I'm challenging you to do this as well on a Sabbath, is I want you to just take a notebook and write everything bad about your life. The hard breakup, the reality that your dad hasn't been present, the financial struggle, the health thing, whatever it is, all these different things. Write an extensive, exhaustive list of everything bad in your life. And he did. And I said, when you get done with that, then I want you to turn the page and I want you to write everything good, everything that God's given you that's good. I love that, I'm not allergic to meat and I can eat, it's something like that. I love that my mom is healthy and she's a part of my life. I love that I have brothers and sisters and we're close. I love that, and just an exhaustive list of everything good in your life. I love that I get to breathe and I'm not allergic to the sun and I can play, whatever it was. And just go. And so he came back to me, and guess what? He had a full, no kidding, 25-line page filled with bad things that are in his life. It was a long list, the longest I've ever seen. But guess how many pages he had of good? 4. 1 full page of bad, hard page, but 4 pages of blessing. But guess what? The 1 wins because we never focus on the 4. And even if there's 4, there's still 1. And that's the one that it's but there's something about, so I just want to challenge, our not stopping to celebrate will convince us that there is nothing to celebrate. Sabbath gives us an accurate picture of our lives and God's grace in our lives. And last, not celebrating leads to distance between us and God. Not Sabbathing leads to distance between us and God. So Deuteronomy 5, verse 15, here's what it says. Deuteronomy 5:15. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath. Isn't that a crazy preface? He just explained that they were freed from slavery, and he goes, oh, and by the way, take a Sabbath because of that. What's he mentioning is that without the Sabbath, we drift from God. We drift away from him, away from remembering what he did, and yet, and forgetting what he's done, and yet God gave us a Sabbath to draw us back in and close that distance, right? And so let me close by giving some really clear application. Now, this went a little bit long. This is an important thing. We'll talk about the Sabbath again, but let me give you some really clear application. You're going to like this. There's some alliteration here. It'll be helpful to walk away. My number one application for the Sabbath is to make a plan to Sabbath. You will never Sabbath naturally. Like, you will never just be like, oh, I just realized it's Saturday at 9 and I Sabbathed all day. Like, there's like never been a time at 9 p.m. that you look back in your day and realize you Sabbath. I just want to let you know that. And so, but also not only plan to like make it, just put it on the calendar, but map it out. Like, plan the day out in chunks or in variants. So here's some ideas for these two things: cease and celebrate. You got to start somewhere, by the way. I would recommend a 24-hour Sabbath. Like, if you're going to go all out, do it. Maybe do like Saturday at 6 to Sunday at 6 or Friday at 6. Whatever works with your schedule. My wife and I, as we kind of sort through, the most likely one for us is Friday at 6 to Saturday at 6. I have to work Saturday night preparing sermons. Like, it just doesn't work for me not to work into this. Anyways, but if you're like 24 hours is too much, start with 5 hours or 4 or 3, some type of Sabbath rest. So here's the two things. Number one, cease. Ceasing involves 3 things. Number 1, stop working. Number 2, stop worrying. Number 3, stop wanting. So ceasing, number 1, stop working. This is a settled heart where you turn off your email, you turn off your phone, and you stop producing. Whatever you do for a vocation, get away from that. Like, whatever you do consistently on the day, don't do it, right? So talk to Jeremy for music. He does music. Don't pick up a guitar on Sabbath. Maybe, but probably not, right? Like, if you're a carpenter, don't do woodworking on your Sabbath. Like, there's some level of like, get away from what you naturally do. Stop working. Number 2, stop worrying. This is a trusting heart, right? Don't check your bank account unless you're like, if I do DoorDash, I might overdraft. I don't know, maybe there, but try and figure out that before the Sabbath. Anyways, don't check your stocks, right? Just surrender and trust. To be completely honest with you, one of the hardest things with me about turning my phone on is my family's health. I just feel like, what if I turn my phone off and my dad's trying to get a hold of Kristen and I because someone got in a car accident? Like, what happens, you know? And that's a weird thing. Maybe no one else feels that, but I feel that personally. I want to confess that. And I'm just like, but at the same time, I'm like, but I think that having my phone on can somehow control that. As if I'm in more control of being able to respond. It's like, no, like, and that would be rare if it happened. And even if it did, God's still sovereign. And they're still going to be just as healthy with or without me. Like, there's some level to that. So just stop worrying. Trust that God is doing something. Number 3, stop wanting. This is a grateful heart, right? Stop wanting. So I'm sorry, ladies, and probably some of the dudes, this is to me too, but no shopping, okay? Like, just enjoy what you've got in your closet, the tech you've got, whatever it is, just enjoy what you have, a content heart with what God has given you. Stop wanting and just look around and go, God, thank you for what I have. I want to play with these proverbial toys, right? That's ceasing. Number 2, celebrating. And you can form your Sabbath in 2 ways. Number 2, celebrate. This is 3 things. Look back, look around, and look up. Okay? Look back, look around, look up. Number 1, look back. This is reflect, right? So I'm just inviting you, space out a time to journal ways that God has blessed you this week. Just write them down, write that page thing. Journal ways God's worked through you this week. What has he done through you? Our staff asks the question about every Monday morning, how has God moved in your life? What has Jesus done in your life? And when we first start, I'm like, I don't know if he has been on the move in my life. And then 30 minutes in, because we're talking about, I'm like, oh, he has worked, you know? And 30 minutes, I'm always like, I got an idea. But it's great. Ask that question. Number 2, look around. This is the invitation to delight. Enjoy what God has given you. Eat good food. Drink good drink. Listen to good music. Hang out with your best friends. Do things that are life-giving. Like, just enjoy. Look around at what God's given and just take full advantage of it. Number 3, look up. This is the invitation to worship. Spend time in the lap of your heavenly Father. Like, just commune with him, enjoy him, get away with him, ponder his goodness, get individual time away with the Father. And so if you don't know Jesus, you need to hear me. I know Sabbath feels like something that would be like far and out. You're like, I'm just debating on my trust in Jesus. This is a whole new thing. But I want to tell you, and for everyone that knows Jesus, the Sabbath and the gospel are so deeply intertwined. The Sabbath and the gospel, I want you to know, are inseparable. Here's what I mean. In Matthew 11, 28 through 30, Jesus says, come to me. Come to me, all who are weary, all who are heavy, burdened, and laden, come to me. And he promises, I will give you rest. You won't find it in Netflix. You won't find it in that vacation. You won't find it in that new promotion. Come to me. I'm the giver of rest. But then you have to ask the question from Matthew 11, well, how does he accomplish rest? Well, then you go to John 19, verse 30. Jesus, innocent, God of the universe, is hanging on the cross, pinned to it. We're going to study more about that Friday and Sunday. He's pinned to the cross, and he cries out, it is finished. You want to know how Matthew 11 comes true? John 19. The reason he invites us to rest, or the way that happens, is because Jesus has finished the work and we can finally rest. And in Hebrews 4, verses 9 and 10, it says there's a Sabbath rest offered to the people of God. He says if we've entered God's rest, we can rest from our works. That's what it is finished means. The Sabbath and the gospel are so intertwined. And so, yes, I think we should have a day allocated to the Sabbath every week. But I also think Christians live in a state of Sabbath where we're not working, we're not producing, we're not hoping that we've done enough for God. No, he says it is finished. We look back at the cross and we go, it is good. In the same way God in creation looked back on creation, said, it is good. We look back and say, that was good. And we look now and say, I can rest. I can know that Jesus has done for me what I could never do for myself. I am at a state of continual Sabbath rest. Christians cease from our work and celebrate Jesus' work on our behalf. That is the gospel Sabbath that we give.